Down with Doug Betts, and we're going to be talking about how to create a great culture, and how do you make sure that you create a company so people don't leave. It just seems to be such a timely podcast, Doug. The fact that culture always seems to be in the headlines, and regardless of the recruitment marketplace, whether there's loads of people on the market or not a lot of people on the market, creating a culture is still important. Where can people find you, Doug?
Okay, so I can be found mainly on social media like LinkedIn, and also my website www.surebetshr.com.
And Doug, you've got a really interesting background, isn't it? Because I mean, you've been involved in HR for a long time, haven't you?
Yeah, 23 years, rather scarily, and counting.
So just give us a quick potted history of what you've done in those 23 years.
So I started out as an HR assistant and worked my way up to HR director over a series of jobs in both the private and the public sectors, and then both as an in-house HR person as well as outsourced. So I've picked up a lot of knowledge and skills along the way. And even after 20 years, I still see the same managers making the same mistakes, and there still being the same cultural issues. So this is why I'm so passionate about this subject and getting this kind of thing right.
So what, if we're going to create a culture, what is it that we need to do?
I think, first of all, work out and define what you actually want it to be. And for me, the best advice I can give a business owner is, how do you want your staff to feel about coming to work for you every day? Because there's so many things that you can get wrong in this. And I think if you start in that, then that's the good starting point to be able to start to define it, and then making sure that whatever behaviours you come up with are enforced by your leadership team as well as yourself.
It starts at the top.
Always.
And it's the CEO or the managing director and the leadership team who have to reflect the values of the culture, isn't it?
They do, because there's nothing going to disengage people more than if they see the leadership team behaving differently to how they've been telling everybody else to behave.
Yeah. Yes. And I always think it's interesting when there's always an announcement. This is where you got to do things, and then people go and do something very differently. I mean, we had it in the government, didn't we? Where we were told to do certain things during COVID, and then other people didn't do what they were told to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see the reaction it gave to people who just felt angry and thought, well, why should we bother to follow those rules? So on a large scale, that is what can happen. And yet I still see similar variants happening in businesses regularly. And it still gets me that said, yeah, after all this time, people are still making the same fundamental mistakes, which are really easy to avoid.
So if we've so in terms of defining the culture, when you say the behaviors, what is it? One of the things that I've seen people do to try and get the team back on track is to do like a whiteboarding where these are good behaviors and these are bad behaviors, and then everybody signs up to doing the good behaviors. What is it that I think we need to be doing it at a more strategic level, but what is it that we can be doing as leaders to set those behaviors?
I think leading by example, it sounds obvious, and also not just about writing keywords on a whiteboard or on a poster in the company reception area. Because I mean, there's so many businesses just have integrity as a value, but they've never defined what it means. And also, why wouldn't you want to have that as a default anyway? This is more about how do you treat your customers, how do you treat your staff, and you shouldn't actually see them as two completely different groups, which so many businesses do as well. So it's really sort of working out, what behavior is acceptable, and also in what kind of circumstances. So, if you're going through a period of change, or you want people to do certain things or projects, again, it's trying to create a culture where people feel they can be creative, they can be themselves, and they can actually contribute something, because most people like to feel that they're making a positive contribution to the company they're working for. And if you've got a culture where people aren't allowed to speak up, or if they do, they get punished and find themselves in the next restructure, those are the kind of things. So for me, it just goes beyond behaviours as words, but looking at actual actions as well, and consequences.
It's a bit like the old saying, isn't it, that the beatings will continue until everybody is happy.
Yes, exactly. And it's like we have ways of making you enjoy yourself at work is the other one, which always gets me. I know I'm nicking this from another one of my fellow HR people who's got a thing about free pizza Fridays, but it's not a substitute to make up for a poor culture just by giving somebody some free food once a week.
Yes. Yeah. 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 And so, I mean, one of the things that we were talking to an organization recently where we basically said, going back to your integrity word, you know, they said they were professional. They described themselves as professional, and we said to them, well, you'd never describe yourself as unprofessional, would you? Yeah. There's kind of like this thing where we feel that we need to add words, where actually I mean, you're never going to say that you're not going to have integrity, are you?
Exactly. And you know, what does professional actually mean? It can mean different things to different people. Is it a corporate power dressing business suit, or is it just treating people with respect and dignity?
And a good point, Doug, because so when we put this together, how do we make sure that we treat people with respect and dignity?
I think it's also putting yourself in that person's shoes and having empathy and thinking, how would I like to feel if I was in that situation? And so many managers and leaders in business are nervous of saying and doing the wrong thing. But this is where people like me come along and coach them to make sure that they are comfortable in kind of having those tricky conversations. But yeah, it's how can they put themselves in that person's shoes and make sure that even if you have to deliver a horrible message or have a difficult conversation, that you still do it in a way that isn't going to make them feel, okay, that's it, I'm not being listened to, I'm not being respected.
Because I mean, even though you may have the best culture in the world, there are certain things which happen where people end up in the wrong jobs.
Yeah.
Things don't go well, and they may have to be layoffs. That doesn't mean that those things can't happen, is it?
No, definitely not. And I think some of the worst leaders I've known are the ones who've shied away from having the difficult conversations because they don't like to appear to be unpopular. And actually, and this is part of a culture as well, a good leader will be respected even if they have to give an unpopular message, so long as they do it in the right way.
Yeah. Yes. And sometimes part of leadership is actually saying things which are or having to do things which will be unpopular.
Yeah, but if you can see the reasons, and so much of it is good communication as well, and if you have to do things or make difficult decisions, explaining why you're doing it, most people will understand it if you take the time to sell it to them, rather than people thinking, here's a rather arbitrary decision that's come from on high and we don't know why we have to obey it.
Yes. So communication is key, is it?
Always. Because I think most people, when they think about what's going wrong in a company, it usually comes down to poor communication somewhere.
Yes, I would say so. Is that there's a saying, isn't there, that communicate something and often, or
little and often,
little and often.
Because people have very, very poor attention spans in general, and therefore if you give them a long sermon, they're not going to remember it. But if you give them key messages that are easy to remember, and it's little and often rather than a once a year appraisal or a once a year talk from your MD, then people are more likely to relate to that, and then they're going to feel they know what's going on, and they're going to feel involved and hopefully still want to be a part of it.
And there seems to be this move also, I think, in organizations today, especially because of a younger generation is expecting to get feedback more often. Is that something that you would recommend? I mean, is the annual appraisal over, or?
The annual appraisal is definitely over. I'm proud of every business who I've managed to persuade to drop it, because it's got absolutely no relevance in the year 2024. The best feedback should be little and often, particularly because roles are changing all the time, as are people. And you can set objectives one day and they could have gone out of date within a few weeks if things change rapidly and you have to react to what's going on in your industry or in the business world around you. So yeah, I would encourage all businesses to try and do away with the annual forms, the laborious paperwork process that doesn't actually add any commercial value to a business, doesn't usually make people feel great. But that's not an excuse to stop communicating. I would still say to people, leaders in businesses, you still need to check in little and often with your team, give them the feedback, make them feel that you're listening and you're communicating with them. It's just, drop the process that would have been a good idea 30 years ago, but no longer has a relevance. Because,
I mean, if you look at the impact of AI, I mean, look how fast how that's changed things in the last 12 months. Anything that you're doing that you were thinking of doing with AI 12 months ago is things have moved on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just important as business leaders, you see themselves as being pioneers rather than somebody who's stuck in the past. Because as a wise ex-boss once said to me, if you don't move forwards and you stand still, you actually go backwards because everybody else is going to overtake you.
Mm. And are you seeing HR policy now being part of the? Because this sounds like these are organisations that are seeing themselves as being innovative.
Mm.
Because HR policy has always been, hiring and firing and maybe a little bit in the middle where somebody does something wrong and you have to get rid of them.
Yeah.
But is this where you're starting to see HR really being part of the innovative process?
Yeah, and it should be. I've said this many times, but I work for one of the most misunderstood professions there is. And there's so many people think HR is hiring and firing when actually it's not. That's actually a manager's job to do both those things. All I've ever done is support them to make sure that they're doing it legally.
Yes.
But actually, when you use HR correctly in a business, we are there to help you innovate. We are there to help you get the best out of your people. And we're ultimately there to help increase your bottom line and your profitability. And if we're kept involved in the key discussions and we know what the strategy is and we devise a people strategy that aligns with your business strategy, then you can see a real value in what we do. And there's a message that I will continue to sort of get out there to people, because I think it's just so important that, as I said, as business owners, they do not need to struggle all by themselves thinking they have to know it all. This is why they employ experts to help them do things like this.
So, one of the things that comes up a lot on the podcast that I do is this term psychological safety. And if we assume that leaders nowadays are going to work and expecting to try and be the best they are, how can we create psychological safety in our workforce?
It's by giving people a voice and making them feel that it's a safe environment for them to be able to express themselves and to be themselves rather than a corporate version of themselves or what they think they want to be. They should be able to be in a culture where they can freely speak out if they're not happy about something, providing it's constructive and not just a general moan.
Yep.
They should be able to talk openly if they're struggling as well. And they should be able to ask for help without fear of being labelled as a failure or somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. The other thing that's linked to this is very much about having very clear expectations about what the job is actually designed to do, because there's so many businesses I go into where there's no job description, and no wonder there's a mismatch because people have a very different idea about what they should be doing versus what their managers and the senior leadership team expects them to be doing. So again, all of those things would make people feel unsafe if they weren't there. So it's that environment where there's open communication, where people can talk, where people's ideas are listened to and they are valued. Even if you can't take them on board, at least you get some feedback about it. So that, going back to your point earlier about ongoing feedback as well. So so many different things you can do to make somebody feel psychologically safe at work.
And I think I think that it's starting to come through because I've worked in organisations where you weren't allowed to say, if you said the wrong thing, you were so you didn't say anything. And then people say, so why aren't you saying anything? Because you hit me every time I say something. But I think it is starting to come through where we're starting to see people actually being listened to. Well, I'm starting to see it in organizations, and there's not so much of the top down this is the way that you have to perform in meetings. And if you say something stupid, then you're stupid, type thing.
Yeah. And it's just so important to get that bit right, because your employees can give you some really valuable feedback that you might be missing if you're a business owner, because they can tell you what's going on at the ground level and you can change things for the better. And something I've always encouraged my clients to do is have a ban the stupid rule competition. So
what?
A ban the stupid rule competition.
Okay.
So that's where perhaps there's something that made perfect sense 5 years ago, but you're still doing it and there's no real reason why, and it's not giving your customers a great experience. So that's something that you can potentially stop doing. So I think getting that feedback rather than just thinking you know best because you're sitting at the top of this organizational structure is a really valuable way of getting that feedback and making people feel safe and that they've got a voice.
So there's two things I wanted to first and foremost is so part of that culture is allowing people to be wrong.
Yes.
From a leadership perspective and an individual contributor perspective.
Yeah, people have to be allowed to make mistakes and not be punished for it, because that's how you learn, it's how you innovate, it's how you grow. Obviously, a good manager will stop somebody making such a big mistake that the company goes under or loses significant amounts of money. But it's, give them a bit of a parameter to experiment and to try things out.
And also, it's about making sure that everybody is listened to in meetings, because still, I think leaders expect to come along and go, or think they're expected to have all the answers.
Yeah, and leaders don't these days. Most people just want a bit of guidance or good communication. And yeah, you can't know it all. You can't, as a leader, be an expert in finance, HR, marketing. That's why you have your experts to advise you no matter what level you're employed at. And yeah, your team can give you valuable insights into things, and you can make decisions based on that feedback or not. But at least be seen to be listening, because again, I've seen so many people get frustrated when they've come forward with really good ideas that have been ignored, or worse still, the leaders tried to claim them as their own.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, I used to work for a leader who did that. And then we were all on a call, and the leader said, well, why isn't there any innovation coming from this team anymore? And us team members are basically instant messaging it, saying, because you steal all our ideas.
Yeah, and it's a brave person in that culture who will actually give them that feedback. Now, a good leader will be self-critical and will look at themselves and always be trying to improve, rather than that sort of authoritarian approach, which was the norm many years ago.
And how as leaders do we do that? Is that about in meetings actually asking for feedback and asking for them to reflect on them as a leader?
Yeah, I think it's somebody brave enough to ask for feedback. But I also think to change that kind of style, a leader's got to have enough self-confidence and self-belief in themselves, because usually the leaders that are authoritarian and surround themselves with people who don't disagree with them are the ones who are deep down very insecure about being in that position and are worried they're going to be found out.
And so, but you think that people should actually spend time saying, give me some feedback?
Yeah, and they've got to mean it and be open to it. And again, take it on board rather than, again,
argue with it or something like that.
Yeah.
Or talk over the person like I just did.
Yeah, I know. And I think that's natural human conversations. There's always going to be a bit of overlap. So that's fine. But it's just, it's just really interesting to see just how many people are still leading in this way, and they're still scratching their heads afterwards, wondering why it's all going wrong.
Yes. I mean, I remember working for a VP who, I found him very inspirational, and I mean he was a VP. He had managers working for him, and then there was individual contributors underneath that. And he said, one of the things, as soon as I moved from being a manager and had managers reporting to me, he said I was completely removed from the front line. He said I had no idea what's going on. All I could do is pull levers of things based on my 20-year experience, but what was actually going on the ground floor we were in sales, so what's happening at customers, I have no idea.
And that often happens, and I've been in the same position myself where I didn't know what was going on 2 levels below me. So you had to do certain things to find out, and then just use my experience to advise when I needed to. But yeah, it's not that leaders should micromanage either, because that's the other extreme, where you have people wanting to know the granular detail, which you shouldn't need to. You need to trust your managers until they give you a reason not to.
But I thought that having that self-awareness to actually say that and actually admit it, I thought at the time was actually quite inspirational in terms of saying I haven't got a clue.
Yeah, and it takes a very strong, confident leader to be able to do that. But I think, they need to build on that self-confidence so they can do it, because it can be absolutely invaluable.
Yes, yeah. So if there's anything that an organization can do, give us one thing, Doug, before we wrap up.
Okay, so trying to bring everything into one sentence, I think communicate really well. Know what you want and set that out as a clear expectation. Technically 2 things, but hopefully that helps.
And do it in a timely way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely.
So don't wait for a year to tell somebody at their annual review, you know what you did a year ago? Well, it wasn't very good.
Exactly. Do it now. It means a lot more, and they'll respect you more for it.
Yes. Yeah. Always do always do feedback timely. Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Doug, thanks so much for coming on and talking about that. It's
Thanks,
been
Tim. Good.
for me. I've enjoyed a walkthrough, a talk about culture and some snippets of things that we can do. Where can people find you?
So again, go to my website, www.shorebetshr.com. There's all my links to my social media on there. And you can also sign up to hear regular updates for me. And I'm about to launch a course for leaders in terms of practical tips to avoid just these kind of scenarios. So again, more information's on the website.
I've been to your website, and it's a great resource in terms of what you do and the things that you do and what the experiences that you've got and stuff. And if anybody is interested in HR, it's a great place to go and check out.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right. Thanks very much.